What if one of the Quran's most famous stories, a story you might have heard 100 times, has been completely misunderstood for centuries? Today, we're diving into one of the shortest and, honestly, one of the most famous chapters in the entire Quran, Surah Al-Masad. But the big question we're asking today is a pretty wild one. What if, this whole time, we've had a case of mistaken identity? Dr. Hani challenges everything we thought we knew.
All right, so first things first, let's just quickly go over the story of Abu Lahab that most of us probably learned as kids.
He's the Prophet's uncle, a sworn enemy, and a whole chapter of the Quran predicts his doom and that of his wife. This is the standard version, pulled from traditional histories. But, and this is a big but,
Dr. Hani
points out that when you actually hold this story up against the Quran itself, some pretty serious cracks start to show.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Because when you look at it through the lens of the Quran's own internal logic, the traditional story doesn't just have cracks, it creates these massive theological paradoxes, the kind you just can't ignore.
Think about this for a second. It's a real head-scratcher. How could God expect Abu Lahab to believe in a book when that very same book guarantees he will die a non-believer? I mean, for him to accept the Quran as truth, he'd have to accept that he's doomed to never be a believer. It's a perfect catch-22.
And that's not the only problem. This whole thing bumps right up against the idea of free will, a cornerstone of the faith. The Quran talks a lot about our ability to choose, right? But this story says this guy's fate was sealed and announced while he still had a full 10 years left to live. So, where's the choice in that?
Then there's the punishment itself. Okay, so he hassled the prophet, but others literally tortured and killed believers. Why was his punishment so uniquely severe in the text?
It just feels off, doesn't it? I mean, history tells us about people who did way worse things. We're talking torture, murder, real atrocities. Yet Abu Lahab and his wife are the ones who get singled out by name for this unique eternal condemnation. You have to ask, why them?
And maybe the biggest problem of all, it seems to directly contradict other parts of the Quran. There are other verses that say no one, not even the prophet himself, knows their final destiny. So how can that be true? And this story also be true? They can't both be right.
So with all these paradoxes piling up, you have to wonder, could the traditional story just be wrong? All these questions are screaming for a new explanation. And
Dr. Hani
puts forward a completely different identity for Abu Lahab.
Abu Lahab isn't a proper name at all. It's a title, a description. Abu means father of, and Lahab means flame, the father of flame. It's a fitting title for the ultimate tyrant, the one known for torturing people with fire, Pharaoh.
It changes everything. Yep, you heard that right. Not the prophet's uncle from 7th century Mecca, but the Pharaoh, the one from the time of Moses, centuries and centuries earlier. This isn't just swapping one person for another. It's a completely different historical setting, a totally different story. So how do we get there?
Dr. Hani
He doesn't just pull this out of thin air. The case is built using 4 very specific keys.
Dr. Hani's approach sets a crucial ground rule for our investigation. To solve a Quranic mystery, you can't just rely on stories passed down over time. Nope, the key to unlocking the puzzle has to be found right there, inside the Quran itself. The text has to be its own guide. And the main forensic tool we're going to use is this idea of Quranic markings. You can think of them like linguistic fingerprints. They're these unique, very specific words or phrases that the Quran strategically places in different chapters to connect stories that seem, on the surface, totally unrelated.
Let's break it down. We're going to walk through each of these 4 proofs, one by one, to see exactly how this conclusion is reached using nothing but the source text. All right, proof number 1, the linguistic key. This is fascinating. The root verb here is taba, which means something like to perish or to be cut off. Now get this, that word only appears 4 times in the entire Quran. 2 of them are right here in this chapter about Abu Lahab, and the other 2, you guessed it, they refer directly and only to Pharaoh. That's a pretty big coincidence, right?
next up, the grammar. This is another huge clue. All the verbs in the chapter are in the past tense. It says he did cut off, what he gained. It's all talking about something that's already happened, a story that's finished. Now, that fits Pharaoh perfectly. He was long gone. But it makes zero sense for the prophet's uncle, who was still alive and kicking for another decade.
Okay, proof number 3, the thematic key. The chapter says Abu Lahab will enter a fire with flames. So let's do a little search. If you scan the entire Quran for any named man who is specifically promised an-nar, the fire, you only get one result. Just one, and that person is Pharaoh. Again, the text itself seems to be pointing in one very specific direction.
And finally, the contextual key. This is where it all clicks into place. The Quran describes Pharaoh's crimes as torturing believers with fire and cutting off their hands. And what is the punishment described for Abu Lahab? To be burned in a fire with his own hands cut off. It's a perfect mirror image. The punishment is an exact match for the crime.
Okay, so if Abu Lahab is Pharaoh, that solves a lot of problems. But it opens up a huge new question. Who is his woman, the carrier of firewood? And this, my friends, is where the whole thing takes its most incredible, stunning twist.
Because the identity of his woman doesn't just add a new detail. It completely reframes the end of the chapter. It turns it from a curse into something else entirely, a tribute.
See, the Quran is totally clear elsewhere that Pharaoh's woman, Imra'at Firaun, was actually a righteous believer, a good person who literally prayed to God to be saved from Pharaoh's evil. So there is no way the verse is condemning her to hell with him. It just doesn't compute. That means we have to be reading those words about her wrong.
And that's exactly what Dr. Hani argues. He shows that these Arabic phrases have much deeper, more nuanced meanings. Hamalat al-Hatab isn't just a carrier of firewood. It can also mean the one who took on the burden against the cutting. And Hablun min Masad isn't just a simple rope of palm fiber. It can mean a tight, twisted bond, like a secret pact or a deep commitment.
So, when you plug these richer meanings back into the verse, the whole thing just flips on its head. It's not a description of a punishment at all. It's describing her heroic act. She's the one who took on the burden, that tight, secret bond, to protect the baby Moses from being cut off by Pharaoh's terrible decree.
So let's just put these two interpretations side by side. On the one hand, you have the traditional story, a local feud that creates major theological headaches. And on the other, you have Dr. Hani's reading, a profound story about history's greatest tyrant, Pharaoh, and the amazing hero who stood up to him to save a prophet. And this version, it solves every single one of the paradoxes we started with.
So why is this a big deal? Because this reading completely elevates the chapter. It's no longer just a historical anecdote about a family argument. It becomes this timeless, universal lesson about confronting tyranny, about the quiet heroism that can exist in the darkest of places, and about the true nature of faith and justice.
Dr. Hani actually used a quote from the Quran to drive this point home, suggesting that when our interpretations create contradictions, it might be because, as the verse says, they did not ascribe to Allah His due reverence. The argument here is that the coherence and majesty of the text have to come first.
And that really leaves us with one final, fascinating thought. If this kind of text-based, forensic approach can completely reframe one of the most famous chapters in the book, it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other secrets, what other incredible layers of meaning are just waiting to be discovered when the Quran's own text is used as the key?